Hi, John McCarty here with Odyssey Test Prep alongside JP. Today we are going to talk a little bit about a wrong answer journal. So, what should you do when you are practicing, whether it's timed, untimed, in any context? What should you do with those questions and how to get the most out of them? So, JP, why don't you walk us through a little bit more about a wrong answer journal, what that should look like, maybe even some of the nuts and bolts of like organizing things in it.
Yeah, so I think everyone's wrong answer journal um, looks different, but there are components to wrong answer journals I think are important, however which way you do format it. So I think first we got to start with what's the purpose of a wrong answer journal, right? So I think in having a wrong answer journal, the purpose is to catch patterns and see, okay, in the mistakes I'm making, are they upstream? Are they downstream? Where do I tend to have trouble? So in a wrong answer journal, I think it's important to um, have somewhere your reasoning as to why you chose that answer, so that when you go back and review, you think, okay, for these questions, I tend to fall into this trap by, um, going down this path. And then you document it so then you can see patterns. Um, so I would say it's very important to have in shorthand, because it only needs to make sense to you,
Right.
the reasoning as to why you chose an answer and aspects or components that helped you see why a different path was the right answer. And again, it has to make sense to you. So I sometimes see people copying verbatim what someone else says.
Hmm.
And it's very important that's personalized to your understanding.
Yeah, for sure. And your everyone's shorthand is going to be a little bit different, and it should look like almost like nonsense to somebody who is unfamiliar with this question or your system as to how you do it. Now, you said upstream or downstream. Can you elaborate on those terms quickly in case somebody hasn't heard us talk about those before?
Yeah, of course. So, excuse me. So I think in in defining those terms, upstream would be, was the confusion centered more so around the stimulus? Oh, I have no idea what the stimulus was saying. Or I didn't catch that there was a distinction in what was mentioned in the premise versus what was mentioned in the conclusion, as is often the case. So upstream would be living in the world of the stimulus, whereas downstream would be, um, the answer choices, differentiating between them, what they actually mean. Um, so I think sometimes you can see patterns in students and where their confusion lies, where maybe they're good on one part, but then, this is the part where they have trouble with.
Yeah, for sure. And isolating where that occurs for you and if there are any patterns for you specifically as to, oh, I keep messing up with isolating the conclusion. I keep getting the wrong conclusion. Well, all right, you got to fix that before you fix anything else, right? Um, so I think that's really important. What other things are you categorizing? Are you looking at things like question type, length of the questions? Are you tracking how much time you're spending on these questions? Like, what are some other things that might go into this journal?
Yeah, so I definitely think question type is very useful because I feel like um, this is very helpful for catching patterns, right? So it could be like, oh, I actually didn't notice, but for this question type, I'm usually very confused as to maybe like the question stem, like,
Hmm.
is this SA? Is this NA? Something even small like that, where,
Yep.
I see some students where it's like, wait a second, guys, make sure you read the question stem again. What exactly are they asking for, right?
Oh, 100%. Yeah.
Um, I had a student recently who, um, the question was mentioning something about being virtually unchanged, but then the student just read through it a little too quickly. So in their head, they're thinking, no change, no change. So then
Hmm.
when I was probing a little bit and I was like, hey, so what's the difference between virtually unchanged and no change. In LSAT world, that little modifier makes a huge difference. So I was telling the student, oh, it seems like sometimes we miss what the question stem is asking, or like a component of the question stem, which then affects everything else.
Yep.
So definitely question type, little notes as to if you are using a program, maybe timing like, okay, I'm spending like 3-4 minutes on parallel flaws, or um, any patterns that you recognize. But I definitely think, should you have a program, time would be good to add. But definitely question type, I think, is without a doubt helpful.
Okay. And then so like a lot of this we're talking like looking for patterns and things like that. How far back into your prep, let's say you've been prepping for like 3 months, how far back are you looking for patterns? Because what may have been an issue at the beginning of your prep may have since been corrected. So just kind of like what's your general um, time frame that you're looking to see patterns within?
So I think that's an excellent question, because definitely, like we always say, studying isn't linear, right? But there are phases where,
Yeah.
say in the beginning, essay, NA, conditional reasoning, what in the world is happening? But once you establish a foundation, um, I think you can, there are like stages that you reach. So I think the pattern note taking and bookkeeping is helpful for, let's say, like the latest stage that you reached, rather than going all the way back. And then it's like, maybe this is just writing just to write, but
Hmm.
the utility isn't too high. So I would say, like we've been saying in other episodes, it's really like an experiment. So it's like, okay, now I'm at this checkpoint. I know what to do when I see conditional reasoning. I now understand contrapositives. Um, Let me make sure that I'm paying attention to the patterns I've been making from like, this point onward. Say with problem sets or practice tests, or from this state onward.
Yeah. And I always think of like the kind of uh, a chart of focus when people are thinking of studying for the LSAT. Like at the very beginning, it's like all content and like no timing, no like, and then these two things start to change as time goes on and they converge at some point. And then the timing becomes the utmost important thing. And the reps on practice test becomes like the absolute focus. And then these little tweaks as far as content goes becomes like more what you're doing. So is it fair to say like when you reach that point where you feel like timing and content are about equal as far as like your priority, that's the point where really tracking this stuff starts to have at least the most value?
I definitely think so, because this isn't something I did in, I guess, the early stages of my studying. Maybe in the mid to late stages, I think this became particularly helpful, because I think sometimes I see students where they get a wrong answer, and prior to our working together, they get a wrong answer, they check the answer, they're like, oh, that makes perfect sense. But they don't really, they let it slip under the radar, right? And they don't fully understand it, or they're not really extracting the full value, right? Because the wrong answer is, I guess with anything, it's an opportunity, right? Where it's like, I ran a race, but I didn't do well. Like, what went wrong? Or like, in that mistake, what's value that we can extract from it? Um, so I definitely think in the latter stages is particularly helpful for um, fine tuning, say maybe getting past plateaus, or um, just being mindful that there are some mistakes. Let's go back to them and see if we really did understand them. So I think one thing that was very helpful for this is, again, in whatever format you do have it in, to revisit some questions and see, like, we gave it some time. Let me look at it. Um, how does that correct path or that correct line of thinking feel like after some time?
Yeah, for sure. And even if you're not tracking those questions at the beginning, like a deep review of those questions is super important.
Yes.
And I would recommend, if you are working with a tutor, that you should start off right away having your wrong answers journal. And because then you can bring that to your tutoring session and review that quickly with your tutor at the beginning of your session. And that's going to help accelerate your learning and make sure that the reasoning that you had as to why this was right or that was wrong, that you actually are bringing the correct reasoning. If you don't, your tutor has the opportunity to correct it. And then you can make sure you have everything really tight for before you move on to the next piece of content.
Yeah. I think that I really like the distinction that you made, right? Where it's um whether you have it right or wrong. One thing I would also say is um I in my, I guess, something that I would call like a wrong answer journal, sometimes I'd also make sure to star or take note of questions that I got right, but they felt off. Like something, there were lapses in my understanding.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I always tell students, it's like you're hobbling on a fence, right? And it's 50-50. Are we in the correct basket or the wrong basket? And oh, lucky, this time we fell in the right basket. But
Right.
um, to to be effective, we don't want to be hobbling, right? And this one right, don't need to look at it. That one's in the bag, but it's like, is it really in the bag, right? We For the ones that we do feel like that, there is value to be had in looking at um, why the right answer is the right answer, or just playing in the world that it exists in, right? Because, like you said, sometimes people can get the right answer, but for the wrong reasons. So, keeping track of ones that felt iffy, I think, is um, high value as well.
Yep, for sure. Treating those just the same as you would treat ones that you got incorrect, I think is a good rule of
Yes.
thumb. So in your journal, is this like a written journal? Is this an Excel sheet for you? Or what kinds of different mediums have people used there?
So, I know I've brought this up, but in this, for the study buddies I've had, uh, one in Michigan, one in South Korea, um, my study buddies liked using, um, like typed notes. And I played around with it. I've done typed notes where I can type a lot faster than I can write. So, um, just breezing through like my thoughts. But I honestly am, and I always advocated for students as well. I'm a very big fan of handwritten notes. I think there is something where in writing it down, it sticks a little bit more. And of course, in typing notes, you can interject, humor or your own personal touch. But I think that's like especially the case with writing, with that personalization. And I think in writing, there's um, something that helps it stick a little bit better. So I would do writing.
Okay. Yeah, interesting. Yeah, and I could see the benefit of that because I definitely there's something tactile to that um is a bit of a richer experience, and you can kind of like draw symbols and like arrows and conditional diagramming, and shorthand becomes a lot easier. Like there's a lot of advantages in that sense. I would say probably to having like a sheet or like an Excel file, being able to sort things very quickly and easily to see and like run counts on how many weekend questions you missed or strengthened questions or things like that. Um, there could be some value in that as well. So, yeah, I think for me, I always kept it handwritten, but I do know some people are like love the data that they can pull if it's in an Excel sheet.
It's funny that you say that because I think um, I was bio and psych in uni, and talking about like cognitive psych, there's always research about like young students or students in general. Like, right, there is value in writing for um, like memory retrieval, et cetera, for performance, et cetera, et cetera. So I was always team writing, but my South Korean study buddy, like you said, it was very much just data, all the formatting, like you
Yeah.
know, within the last month, I've seen like 50% drop it. I'm like, oh wow. So I think the key is definitely, I think one can try both. it's it's not hard to try both and see what you find
Yeah.
more value in. But I think the key here, as is the case for many things that we've talked about, is keeping engagement high, right? So choosing something that you're actually likely to do and to look over. Um, yeah, to have more meaningful studying rather than, you know, you're sitting down, the hours fly by and it's like, oh, what was your session like? Oh, yeah, I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah. Or spending like 5 hours crunching the numbers and only 1 hour studying. You know, the value is going to be in the studying more than it is in the crunching of the numbers too. And um, so it's important to know, and everybody does it a little bit, is this like little cheat of like, I want to pretend like I'm doing actual work, but I really just want to veg out for a little bit. And the way that I do that is, maybe some people watching this podcast right now are just like, all right, I'm taking a break from the LSAT, but I'm still kind of doing the LSAT. Um, but yeah, you could do it in a number of different ways. It can be roaming through the forums. It can be, crunching the data and trying to get deeper and more granular on your analytics. At the end of the day, like, you need breaks, and that's all okay. But the real value is going to come from the time you spend and doing the questions, reviewing the questions, revising, discussing those questions with other people, and really adapting, what your approach to each individual question type is.
Yeah, and one thing I'll say is I think I've just seen a lot of students where, they get a wrong answer and look at the right answer and say, oh, okay, nice. Time to move on. But it's like, whoa, whoa, whoa. There's so much value to be had here in why did we get it wrong? What was your reasoning? Can we play with the worlds that exist in each of the answer choices? The world that is given to us by the stimulus. Um, and it's funny because I think this is usually referred to like as a wrong answer journal. So I think if people don't play around with this, they think, like handwritten, like a report, something that has to make sense to someone else. But again,
Right. Yeah.
completely personalized, shorthand, and really we're just trying to do something with the wrong answers. We're trying to engage them to better understand them, to better understand our reasoning and um, make something out of it. So
Yeah. And
yeah,
I might even rebrand it an opportunity journal, right?
yeah,
Because it's not just the wrong answers you got. Like, we've also talked about the ones you get right, but maybe you could have gotten wrong, right? These are just
yeah.
anywhere where there's an opportunity for you to improve your understanding and thereby your skills and your score. That's what should be going into this journal so that you can work with it, you can keep track of it, and you can ultimately improve.
Mm-hmm. And one thing that, and again, right, you have your notes, you see your reasoning, question types, um, maybe 10. I think the shorthand and personalization is huge because that helps studying become more fun, but it also helps having things stick. I sometimes see students um, just write down what other people say, but it's like, what is it in what what I said, or in what this forum post said that made sense to you? Like how would you put it in your own words? And then it becomes more personal. Then it's sticky.
Yeah.
Um, I think that aspect is huge because one thing that I've done, and by virtue of having this opportunity journal, I see like, okay, we've um, there's a lot of essay that we're having trouble with, and it's usually trouble in distinguishing between essay and NA. From there, I sometimes tell students like, let's try to like mimic the structure of the stimulus, but let's put it in something that you are interested in, right? Maybe this one was on, I don't know, medieval European art, right? But maybe that's not your cup of tea. Let's talk about NBA teams. So I think
Hmm.
just anything to drive engagement and um, make studying a little bit more richer.
Yeah, for sure. And for those who don't know, essay, NA, that's sufficient assumption, necessary assumption. Those are question types on the LSAT. If you haven't gotten that far, that's all right. You will encounter those, and almost everybody goes through that struggle of like, first of all, I have found that most students do not properly diagnose the question stem. Right. Like that's the first thing that I've noticed is the biggest issue with sufficient assumption and necessary assumption. They just have in their mind assumption and then they go one way or the other. I found that students who have that distinction extremely clear and never mess up what the question stem is, that they are pretty accurate on those various question types. So that's something that I think has an amount of value that people don't know or don't understand how powerful it is. Like if you don't understand the question you're being asked, what are your chances of getting it correct? It's so fundamental that I think people skip it. They don't skip it altogether, but they don't, very few take the time to master it. And to master it, I mean, you could go through a whole section and you would identify every single question type correctly. Once students get to that point, they're almost always in the mid 160s or higher. And so like not understanding the question being asked is one of the fundamental issues that is holding a lot of people back from getting extra points on the test. But there's also such subtlety between question types that understanding that subtlety automatically gives you an insight into how to then be correct on those types of answer choices, like necessary assumption versus sufficient assumption. If you truly understand the differences between the two and the wording of the differences and how those appear on the LSAT as various different question types, then you have a pretty deep understanding of what you're supposed to do for each one of those. And I think that's super useful. Have you found that as well when you're working with students that there's some misdiagnosing with some of these question stems?
100%. I think that's an excellent point that you bring up because it's rough, right? If you're trying to play a game but you don't understand what the rules are or what the objective is, then there's balls flying out everywhere. You're like,
right.
You're already on shaky ground. So yeah, I think that's like a very relevant point where I have seen a lot of students where they're not sure what the question is asking, right? And then we have to break it down, and it almost seems a little like funny or something that would just not be in like center of mind, but there oftentimes are subtleties in how the question's asked. It's like, wait, read that one more time. That's actually a sufficient assumption. Or, there's all these categorizations, like it's like pseudo sufficient assumption, like this or that. But I think, like you said, just reading the question stem, what are they asking? In what world are we playing in, right? Like what are the bounds? What am I trying to do? I think, that's very, very helpful. Or even, like, hey, did you notice that this is like MSS, like most strongly supported, must be true? Like what are the bounds in which we are operating? I think it's not something that people think about, but it's very valuable.
Yeah, because the question sets the rules of the game. People think that the rules are consistent throughout the LSAT, and they're not. Each question stem sets the rules of that question stem. So this is, I hear this a lot, like, oh, you're not allowed to bring in any new information onto the LSAT. Everything that you need is on the page or in the stimulus, and you can't bring in any new information. You can't go, if they didn't mention it, it's out of scope immediately. Which is true for something like a must be true question. But it's completely untrue for something like a, resolve the discrepancy question, where the resolution of that discrepancy is a lot of times some of the wildest out of left field stuff you've ever heard, that you have to have a really open mind to be like, oh yeah, I guess if that is true, which a lot of times may seem absurd. Even if this absurd thing is true, then I guess we could resolve that discrepancy. These two things could coexist together. So on one question type, if you bring in outside information, you're going to get burned immediately. On another question type, if you don't bring in outside information, you're going to get burned immediately. So like know the rules of the game for every single individual question type. And that's going to help substantially.
Yeah. And you bringing up that point, that actually reminded me of a student I had last month where he, and I think the core of it was not understanding the question types well enough, where he would apply the wrong mindset to the wrong question types. And I would tell them,
Yeah.
oh, hold on a second. Within this world, we should be operating in this way, or, this kind of framework, this kind of open-mindedness is actually good. So then, kind of like how you were getting at, I had him do a lot of must be true, and I had him do like various different question types where it's like, within this world, this is the thing that we're operating in. Within this world, this is our mindset, and having him see the difference and see how the questions are worded a little differently. Yeah, because that's huge. Because another thing is that open-mindedness that you're saying, right? There is value in predicting the answer, but we don't want students to hug their answer too tightly, right? But being aware that, say for resolving this paradox, there's various ways to resolve it, or and what has to be necessary to hold the argument up. Maybe we're thinking of one, two things, but they bring in something else. Well, yeah, that actually is necessary. So I think that, just knowing what kind of mindset.
Useful. And I think having that prediction, as long as you keep an open mind, you can see that this answer choice functionally does what my prediction did. Yes. So I went through all the steps to get to the thing that I'm looking to do, and mine is wrapped this way, and they wrapped it this other way, but functionally they do the same thing. And so like, as long as you have the open mind and you're not like, like clenching onto your prediction super hard, I find that it usually helps get you to the right answer.
Yeah, and just as you're noting there, I think in that process, it's very helpful to take a step back, right? And see like, to fulfill this objective, this is a general thing that I should be doing, right? Maybe I should be protecting the conclusion from some attacks, or maybe, if I add this point, but there are like general things I should be doing. And, maybe it didn't fall under our prediction, but, we were trying to protect this plan, but the answer choice focused on why, like other plans, like et cetera, approaching it from a different angle. And I think, that perspective is very important, because sometimes I see students not understand the reasoning, or the like being able to take that step back and seeing like how we should be fulfilling this objective, or the various general ways in which we can do it. And sometimes they'll just, it's a very myopic view, and they're just hugging onto that tree. I'm like, whoa, there's a lot of different trees here. I just want you to take a couple steps back to see the various ways to fix this, or to handle this.
Yeah, and I think a good drill, and I would even do this on actual tests sometimes, depending on the question, is when I'm working on my prediction. And if you're practicing and you're doing LSAT questions untimed and you're not predicting, you're not practicing LSAT questions, in my opinion. Like if you're not going through that process of prediction, which means once you've read the stimulus and the question stem, whichever order you'd like to do it in. I like to do it in the order given, but some people reverse it and they've done very well. But at that point, before reading the answer choices, you predict what you think the correct answer choice could be, or should be, or might be, right? So it's not necessarily what it will be, but you may end up hitting the nail on the head. So first off, it's super important to be doing that. If you're not doing that, you're not really studying for the LSAT, because dialing in your prediction skills is the most important thing that moves the needle, because you either fall on your face in your prediction, or you start to get them right and you start to tune it in, and then you're starting to engage with the material the way the LSAT expects you to engage with the material. but a lot of times I would like to do is get this broad prediction. Like, okay, I'm going to defend this aspect of the conclusion or attack this aspect of the opponent. And then get a specific way that I'm going to do that. I'm going to bring in this extra piece of information that they didn't state, or I'm going to exploit this specific area of the counter argument, whatever I think is the most likely thing. So that way you're kind of getting two shots at this prediction. You're getting this broad thing where that has that's a big umbrella, a lot of different things that you're thinking could maybe fall under this umbrella. And then you're picking the one that you think is actually going to appear in the answer choice. And by doing this, you're like really trying to dial in what your like anticipatory skills with what's going to happen on any given question type. And once you do this a dozen times, 100 times, a few hundred times, a few thousand times, all of a sudden you'll be good at it. But it's gonna suck at the beginning. Like there's no getting around the fact that it's gonna be slow. You're gonna be wrong. It's gonna hurt. Yeah, exactly. But the only way to get better is to stare it in the face. So yeah, I think being able to avoid that like clenching feeling with predicting is kind of creating a really broad prediction and then coming up with your specific, because you know your specific serves this greater purpose, and anything that serves that greater purpose you'll be able to recognize and then move into that answer choice.
And I think in having some sort of notes, right, you're able to recognize strategies that you've used, or sometimes students would be like, oh, I'm actually realizing that I tend to do this. It's like, oh yeah, I did realize that too. Like what are ways that we can make it better? And I think for this really, when LG was around, I think this lent itself to LG. I think LG was just getting a lot of reps in, so doing the games over and over. But I think this really lends itself to LR. And some students will ask, excuse me, how do we do this for RC? And I think I would say, it's very similar. Was the problem, I guess, in the upstream, you have the whole passage, right? So it's like, let's start there. How are we reading the passage? And the value in prediction, like we're talking about here, and how we've talked about in RC before, is just keeping engagement high, right? And being intentional and not just reading through the words. And oftentimes, we gotta be honest, not just students, like anyone. Sometimes I'll read something, someone will ask me, what did you just read? I need to give it another go. But keeping that intention and kind of focus high. Why are they telling me this? How does that relate to the next part? Okay, so you brought up other people's opinion. So now is it going to be your opinion? So I think in having some sort of journal, you can say like, okay, I tend to get lost in understanding like viewpoints in RC, or I kind of get lost in seeing like what the main point was. It's like, okay, what are things that we can do better? Just being mindful of paths that we've taken so we can create new ones.
Yeah, and I really find the tracking of fundamentals to be something that is very hard for people to do on their own. So, whether that's reading comprehension or logical reasoning, like if a student comes to me and let's say we're working on a logical reasoning question, I go through like a diagnostic process with them to figure out, all right, well, where did this thing happen? And it's pretty simple and anybody can replicate this. First thing I ask them is, what kind of question is this? See if they answer that correctly and how quickly they answer that correctly, how confidently they do it. And again, they'll be like, oh, well, this is a flaw because they said this. Like, all right, perfect. You got it. And then second thing I ask them, is this an argument or is this just a set of facts? And then again, how quickly, how confidently will they answer that question?
And then being aware that that's even a thing, right? Because
right.
Sometimes people don't think about that, but it's like, there are distinctions in how we play.
Yeah, and asking people, sometimes I'll ask them, if I know it's a set of facts, sometimes I'll ask them, what's the conclusion here? And then they'll kind of fumble around a little bit and be like, well, is it this sentence or is it this sentence? So like having that skill. So, what kind of question is this? Is it an argument or is it just some facts? If it's an argument, what's the conclusion? How quickly are they in? Like if I can see their notes, or if they, depending on how we're working on the problems, do they have this highlighted or some sort of notation around this? So those first few things, usually I find that if someone got the question wrong, it usually it happened there. Like if you get those fundamentals down, then you're good to go. But then from there, we ask, is it a good argument or is it a flawed argument? And then, all right, how quickly and how precisely can you answer that question? And then from there, all right, well, if it's a flawed argument, if it's a good argument, you can move on. If it's a flawed argument, what's the flaw? All right. And then, so now we're getting into that. And then we look at the question stem and say, okay, well, if you were going to do the function of the question stem, if you were going to find, describe the flaw, and whether it's a flaw question or not, I always want to know if they know what the flaw is in the argument, if it's a poorly constructed argument. And then, so what would your prediction be? And then see how clean that prediction process is. And then, all right, so now you have all of that. How does that match to the answer choice that you chose? And then so like by going through this like very step-by-step process, that again, it's a little tedious, right? But if you do it a few times, because it's tedious, you're going to want to speed it up and you're going to want to work on those skills and iron out all the fundamentals. And then once your fundamentals and your foundation are strong, then you can really let your skills start to blossom. But if you never have that foundation strong, man, I find that people just get stuck there, and it's really hard to improve if you can't isolate the conclusion. Like in a half second, have that conclusion down, know where it's at, be re-referencing it when you're going back through everything. Do you go through a similar process? Like, how do you diagnose either yourself or students as to whether it's upstream, downstream, if it's in the question stem? What's that process look like for you?
I like doing kind of a similar step-by-step process because it's so important to note that the ease at which someone answers those questions, right? Because maybe someone answers one of the beginning fundamental questions, but you can see that there's like some stumbling about, and it's like, wait, is this an argument? Like, actually, I think that's no, I'm going to change it. This is the conclusion. And it's like, oh, okay, like that's so valuable, because then it is in these like foundational steps that we're having trouble. So then, if we're on that shaky ground and we're trying to do everything further downstream, it's like, whoa, like we're blindfolded, we're bumping into trees. Let's get these beginning parts down. And I like how in doing that step-by-step function, and you can kind of diagnose a little bit, right? Where I recently, before this meeting, had to do like a Windows diagnostic, and it was like, does your sound okay? Is this okay? So it's kind of similar to that, where we can see like, where exactly are we on shaky ground, and that's like fill in the cracks and make things a little better. So I like to have students explain, see how comfortable they are, and see how their thought processes are, right? Because maybe they'll bring in some things from somewhere else. It's like, no, like within this framework, like this is actually important. I think that step-by-step function is more readily clear. Should you have a tutor and someone's asking you to check your understanding, or in having some sort of notes, right, where you could see, oh, okay, I really get stuck in this part. So, that's perfectly fine. Let's figure out how can we tackle it. And I will say that, say in someone's notes, right, and this is my line of reasoning, what to do better for next time, or how I understood it. If you're writing like, what to do better for next time, I sometimes see people write like, read better, or
read more closely.
Read more closely, be faster, focus. And it's like, well, like, of course we want to focus more and be faster, read faster, but like, should you have a column or something that's like what to do better next time? I think it's more useful to do things that can be readily applied and and felt, maybe, right? If you tell someone read faster, does that mean like, oh, okay, I'm reading faster? But um, for example, like I had a student recently where I was telling him, I noticed that he was like stumbling about for the question types. So I told him like, oh, okay, for question types, like he had some paperback. So I told him, oh, okay, with your pencil, like, you can touch every word to see that no like modifying elements or no things are like, you know, going under the radar, but you touch every word and then you're fully aware of what the objective is and how that game is shaped. And he's like, okay. So once he started doing that, it was a little bit harder to trick him
Yeah.
with something tangible like that. I think is useful.
Yeah, and that may not be something that goes all the way till test day, and that's the thing that I always want people not to be too afraid of. Like if there's a technique that feels like it's a little bit too slow, but it's getting you better, a lot of times you'll drop the technique once your skill is there, but the technique helps you build the skill to get there.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that's important, especially yeah, like every single word. And most people don't realize that the communication that we do between each other is really sloppy most of the time, which is why contracts even exist, is because if you're going on and you're telling me something about most of the time, blah blah, and I maybe catch like, all right, a lot of the time it happens, but I'm not, I'm not.
Satellite.
Right. Yeah. Because we create these little shorthands and things that are like approximations and close enough to what he said that we can communicate. But it's really important that we understand on the LSAT that it's testing a different set of skills. And this is exactly what is written on the page. And I've known people who have had to do crazy things with the word accept because by the time they get to answer choice C, they forget that it's an accept question. And then they pick the one that does the function instead of the one that does the
Exactly.
opposite function. So like, there's weird hacks that you have to do because part of it is getting rid of every simple mistake that you've made. So you can't go through and say like, oh, I made a simple mistake, I won't do that next time. Well, why won't you do it next time? Well, because next time I'm going to put my pencil on every single word in this question stem. I'm going to make sure that if it did use the word never or accept or some or whatever it is, that I am aware of it and that I'm not going to be tricked for that reason. And then you may make some other simple mistake. But the solution is almost never reading faster. I've never seen that ever be the solution because you don't lose your time reading, you lose your time contemplating. You can read the words that create the question stem, but how long does it take for you to recognize or debate with yourself, is this a weaken or is this a flaw? Or is this an essay or is this NA? And then, all right, well, I have to go through and think of these words. And it said only if. So I think that's usually an NA question. And, and then, that's where all the time is lost. It's not reading, the conclusion would be validly drawn only if. That doesn't take very long.
Yeah, I think I like what you said about a lot of what we talk about is, adjustable. It's flexible in that depending on what stage we're in or in where we need to draw value from, right? We take and go as we please, right? So it's like,
Yeah.
I'm skateboarding. I don't know if you've ever seen it, but I've had a friend that he wasn't comfortable doing like street tricks, and he bought this thing where the wheels are circular. You stand on the board, it's a little wobbly, but he bought these like square things that he put over the wheels, and then it's just balanced. And then from there, he had it's like training wheels almost, where
Yeah.
he can practice his tricks and everything's very like stable.
Uh-huh.
Once he felt comfortable, he doesn't need that anymore. So, like the pencil technique that we're talking about, or I think another good thing that I've seen for what to do better next time is exactly what we've been emphasizing. What's the question type, right? Or another thing I've seen is sometimes students miss like modifying elements. So like that, like it's like they'll be like, "Oh, John, I love this answer choice. It's like, yeah, it looks like a very attractive answer choice, but did you
It's
notice that
supposed
there's
to.
that one modifying word right there that changes the whole game, right? And
Yeah.
it's like, don't I don't want you to fall off of one part of the answer choice. There's, maybe it'll be part one and part two, and we love part two, but part one's like, hold on a second. Or maybe there's one word that they put to modify, the degree to which something could happen, or um, just one word in front, and it completely changes it. So,
Yeah.
telling students, I'll sometimes have them say like, oh, for next time, let's be mindful of like the hard or like soft aspect of this answer choice. And what land of probability are we operating? Like, is it
Yeah.
it has to happen all the time? There's some leeway most of the time, usually, and be able to catch that, right? Because how, like we just talked about, someone will say, oh, this happens most of the time. Most of the time, okay, sometimes it's like, whoa, whoa, whoa. Within the LSAT, this stuff really matters, and how we quantify and modify these things. And let's be mindful that it is a game being played. Let's be mindful that the question types um, do have some subtleties. So, um, getting to the point where it's automatic is good, and it's something to practice, right? Like, let me see for every question type if I fully understand what kind of game I'm playing, right?
Yeah. For sure. Yeah. And I've seen people go both ways on the word most, where like, all right, it's just anything over 50%. And they're like, well, that's not big enough for a most. Most should be like, I don't know, 75% or higher.
Mm.
Like if you had like 100 M&Ms and you got 51 and I got 49, for most people that feels like, all right, you guys got about the same, or that you got some more than me, but you got most of those M&Ms
Yeah,
and
most
I
of them.
got some of those
Yeah,
M&Ms, right? Because we split it in, down that line. So, just knowing strict definitions of things and like memorizing these things and then like playing and not even and like giving up the fight against them too, because sometimes that's the hardest thing to do, is to say, well, no, in a social context, that if someone was like, I need most of the hours today, and you're like, all right, I'll give you one extra minute than me. Now you have most of the time for today. And like that would be unacceptable. Right? So like trying to figure out how these words actually play on the LSAT and in contracts and in the legal field versus how we use them in conversation and how we're used to using some of the terms.
yeah. One thing I was also wanting to share before it slipped my mind was, um, it's also helpful to, um, should you have a tutor or in writing your notes, be mindful of you know, what to do next time, but also like what do we usually do? And, you know, is it helpful? Is it working? Um, I had one student last month where she would always want to just bring in contrapositives or conditional reasoning, and I'd be like, hold on, I'm glad you feel comfortable in using those things. They're very important, but um, let's not make things harder for ourselves when we don't need to use them. Um, and I feel like that's quite common. Sometimes I see people just bringing in things that they don't need, and it's word salad, and they're spending all their time there. But it's like we actually don't have um, conditional logic at play here. Um,
Yeah.
let's not do that. Like that is a common pattern. Or what are some other common like bad habits that we have? That, like, oh, I'm looking at my notes. It does seem I tend to do this. It's like, okay, is it helpful? Should we continue? Should we not?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and we could do a whole another episode on conditional reasoning and when to use it, when not to use it. That one is pretty tricky for most people as they're gaining their skills and trying to figure out. A quick hack that I use is if every sentence has a conditional indicator word attached to it, I'll diagram it out. If it's anything short of that, I'll make a judgment call. If it's only ever one sentence, I usually won't diagram it.
Yeah.
So it's tricky though. Trying to get that just right is very hard for most students when they first learn it.
Oh, definitely. That's one of the games or things that we have to learn early on too, or
Yep.
one of the things where it's tends to be a little foreign. It's like, oh, now I actually learned this mumbo jumbo. One thing I also want to say is, and you're talking about the diagramming, I found, what we've been talking about to be quite helpful because, the dreaded, like math type questions where I was looking at one recently and then because I told a student to like have some sort of like, opportunity journal or some kind of note keeping, right, to track our progress. We revisited a similar type of math question, and then we flipped back, we compared it, and we see the differences in how they approached it, right? So I think when I see those math problems, I like to play with concrete numbers. I'll say something out of 100 or out of 10. Um, and that makes it feel a little bit more comfortable for me. And juggling what can exist within the stimuli boundaries. I had another student where it was like he felt very comfortable just in like I guess bare bones kind of this like one half greater than this, like he felt more comfortable doing that. It's like, oh, okay, like that's fine, but I'm glad that we can compare what we've done before and like what feels more comfortable. Or it's like, well, you
For
actually
sure.
did this before, that was better, like let's bring that back a little bit.
Yeah. And always being mindful too that the technique that you're using has to work on all questions, even the hardest questions. So a lot of times people they'll get those lower level questions and they'll get to like, those level 4 difficulty questions and they're just like, ah, man, I just keep getting beat by those, which is, it's kind of a natural progression. But sometimes it's that the technique that they're using doesn't cover those really high level, kind of fringier feeling questions that the LSAT can ask and does, and that come up on every test that you have to be able to get to an elite score.
Yeah. I do like that point because it really emphasizes the how important it is to keep have how important it is to have strategies that we can replicate and that are versatile and useful, right? And that could be like twisted and adjusted and throughout a range of difficulties or scenarios, that this is a strategy that we can rely on.
Absolutely. Well, I appreciate it, JP. It was always great hanging with you, and we will see you guys next week.